What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and I wanted to talk to you about this really interesting article written by GameIndustry.biz that talks with John Haidt, the new president of Wizards of the Coast. So he started back in August of 2004, and the article goes over a lot of stuff, which I'll skip over a bunch of the beginning stuff, which I would recommend you read if you're interested. But it talks a lot about kind of the digital, he's from a physical or digital world rather in video games. Talks about his tenure from various studios that he's worked for, including spending the last 13 years at Blizzard, being the head of Warcraft. And now he's the head of Wizards of the Coast, the president, and now is obviously blending digital and physical media. But more importantly, he talks about the franchise model. And this is something that was a buzzword a little while back when we heard that D&D was switching to a franchise model, and everybody lost their goddamn mind. And actually, I think was it either John or Dan Ayub or somebody mentioned it, I think on like a tweet or a personal post on their LinkedIn page, and the internet took it way out of proportion. It was like, oh, they're going to a franchise model. Everything sucks. They're going to be like McDonald's. And blah, blah. I don't know what people thought, but they thought wrong is basically what it comes down to. The franchise model is not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing, in my opinion, which is rather than having separate arms for each part of D&D. For example, what it currently is, or what it currently was, rather, was that you had an entertainment arm of Dungeons & Dragons, you had a video game arm of Dungeons & Dragons, and you had a tabletop arm of Dungeons & Dragons. And there was no guarantee, and in almost every case there wasn't, any communication between those three arms. That's how you can have something like the Dungeons and Dragons movie release covered by the entertainment arm and not have anything tied to the physical game releasing at the same time, which would have been a great concept. Same thing with the video game arm, right? Sure would have been smart, don't you think, if when Baldur's Gate 3 launched, we had a complimentary D&D campaign that was tied to Baldur's Gate, or maybe even a similar story or a side story or something releasing at the same time. Wouldn't that have made sense? How many seasons of Stranger Things have we had, and we only had a box set, and now finally we're getting the Welcome to the Hellfire Club box set coming out just shortly before the launch of the final season, I think in November. Wouldn't it have made a lot of sense to sync those up? And maybe, perhaps, if the video game arm was talking to the tabletop arm, the Dark Alliance video game wouldn't have been so bad. I don't know. But that's me paraphrasing a lot of what's said. We'll go into the article here and talk about it. And also some really interesting stuff that he talks about. Again, having that MMO background, what it would look like, and maybe the concept of a future D&D MMORPG. So this is, again, I'll link the video or the article in the video description, but this is kind of what I was just talking about here under one roof. One of the things I've done is effectively move to a franchise model view of how we do things. So all of Magic, whether digital or physical, sits under Ken Troop. Ken's been with the company for 20 years. He knows a lot about Magic. I wanted to make sure that anything we did on the digital side was true and authentic to Magic community, and I wanted to make sure all of our activities were under one roof. Similarly, the same thing here with Dan Ayub on the D&D side. Haidt notes that aligning everything Magic related under one division and everything D&D related under another should allow for better coordination between different aspects of the same franchise, such as making sure TV or film adaptations align with game releases. Here's the concept where he brings up the D&D Honor Among Thieves movie, how that came out with no any tie-ins. Again, the D&D Beyond team did some work to put out some digital releases along the same time, but there wasn't anything really formal. I again mentioned Stranger Things as well. He also goes on, and I'll paraphrase this for you here, but basically that along with aligning all of the different arms of the company under one person, he also wants to do a better job of trying to align the physical and the digital aspects of the game. For example, launching cards the same day in physical print for Magic the Gathering as they launch in Magic the Gathering Arena, right? So not like Arena gets theirs 3 weeks later or whatever the case may be. You're not debuting one in one medium but not in the other. This would be, again, probably a similar concept to like a book shows up digitally in D&D Beyond the same day you can get the physical book, kind of a concept. Again, also stressing that people are sort of getting back to the point in a post-COVID world where some people are starting to go back to in-person gameplay as opposed to just online. And talks a little bit here about their digital arm. What is it? Wizards Digital Ventures. Um, let's see. This is actually really interesting about video game development. So, in addition, Wizards of the Coast operates a central content development team that any of its internal or external studios can draw on. The idea, he says, is to have a set of artists and designers that are trained up on the IP, whether D&D or Magic the Gathering, that have a love and affection for the IP and an understanding of it and can effectively move from one game to the next. This move avoids the typical peaks and troughs of game development. One of the complexities from a business standpoint for these big games, he says, is that they require the assembly of a huge workforce towards the tail end of the development. Then, after the game releases, you've suddenly got this very large team on your hands. You can't really shift them necessarily to the next game because early on, concepting of a game is not going to have a need for as many team members. But by maintaining a central team, we'll have this group of people that we can move from one game to the next. And because they all share a love of D&D and will be working on a story-driven D&D themed games, the transition should be relatively easy. It's not like we're trying to take them from a football game to a racing game to an RPG. And he brings up their internal studios are Atomic Arcade in North Carolina, Invoke Studios in Montreal, and Skeleton Key and Archetype in Austin, Texas. Also, that they brought on 15 members of Cliffhanger Games who were working on EA's canceled Black Panther game. And then also mentions Giant Skull, led by Jedi Survivor director Stig Asmussen, is working on a single-player action-adventure title, which we've talked about in the past. Okay, so then he goes on a little bit here about AI and what goes on with that, and that they're not planning to use AI for anything creative specifically. Final product, the thing that you see will be made by a human being, and that's our position on it. So we're not using generative AI to create the artwork for our cards or games. But, being a businessman is saying, we're not opposed to looking into AI to sort of remove any sort of derivative drudgery stuff. Like, I mean, he gives a couple of examples here. The idea would be to see how players, where is it? For instance, generating an audio performance so that a writer can hear their words before we go into the recording studio, I think is going to help us make those recording sessions go a lot faster and smoother. So I guess this would be like, right, you're a writer, you write down a speech, and I think we've all seen it, and we've probably all done it when you're running a game and you think you have something that sounds great, or maybe you even have an NPC name. Matt Mercer's notorious for this, that you think sounds good, and then you say it out loud, and then everybody reacts to it funny. But maybe if an AI sort of generated recording sort of read that back to you, you'd be like, oh, nope, let's tweak and adjust that before we pay an actor to come in to do the recordings. The idea here would be to see how players respond to AI-generated lines first, and to examine how the dialogue works in games with the recording sessions with real actors being left as late as possible in the development process. So by the time the sessions happen, the dialogue is honed and complete, enabling the actors to give the best performance. Yeah, I think we saw this with Destiny Rising. If any of you played, like, Destiny Rising just released 2 weeks ago. It's the digital, or it's the mobile version of Destiny. It's a little bit different than the main game, but either way, I was in the alpha, and because it was alpha, there were certain instances where it would say, like, you'd have like a voice actor talking in voice actor dialogue, and then it would just cut to a generic AI voice saying it. It would even said in the game in parentheses, like, this is AI generated voice, like, will be replaced with like voice acted lines when complete. So it was just kind of allowing you to play the game and still have it be, voice acted, or at least the lines be voiced. But it wasn't until the actor could get in, and now that I've gone back and checked, that all those lines have been updated to be actual voice acted lines in the final version of the game. So that could be something. Another option he brings up here is, could you use AI to help with difficulty balancing, right? Um, she says perhaps the game could increase the difficulty of puzzles, but reduce the difficulty of a dexterity challenge if it sensed the player is breezing through the former and struggling with the latter. I guess this would be the concept of trying to make a living version of, like, the Nemesis system from, like, the Shadow of Mordor games, which is fantastic, but we obviously don't have access to that because WB patented it, and then we're not allowed to use it. But this would be the concept of like, yeah, if they can legitimately adapt almost real time to what's going on because of the AI generated nature or the AI nature of these things. And then they go on here to talk about an MMO. And he says, I'd love to have that. I think we'll want to rethink what an MMO is in this day and age. I think the traditional model that Blizzard, well, even before that Ultimate Online EverQuest pursued, could use some updating. He references D&D Online here. And we live in a world where there's actually two concurrent D&D MMOs at the moment. You have Dungeons and Dragons Online, and then as well as Neverwinter. Both of those are still active, I believe, and both still producing new content and updates, which is wild because Dungeons and Dragons Online is like circa 2004, 2005, and Neverwinter, I think, is like 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. Obviously, one is third edition based, one is fourth edition based. And I can tell you, I was always surprised we didn't get one for fifth edition, but obviously, we didn't know fifth edition was going to be as popular as it was, and Neverwinter was still going strong at the time. But who knows? Maybe in a world now where the video game aspect and the tabletop aspect are now all kind of handled under one franchise model, maybe things like that could happen. Because obviously we saw the popularity of Baldur's Gate 3. It took the world by storm. It swept every award, and it introduced a ton of people to the world of the Forgotten Realms as well as Dungeons and Dragons. We live in a world where that did very well, so perhaps there is room for a D&D MMO in the future. I think obviously if this were to be in development and be put out, it's obviously going to be several years out. So let's be generous and say 2027. Part of the process that I think would be one of the most difficult and interesting things is what does an MMO look like in 2027? Right? You look at things like Warcraft and other things that have been around for 20 or more years. The landscape of what you needed to do to be a successful MMO back then was kind of just exist. Now, other MMOs have come and gone. Some burned too bright and fell out. Others just didn't really make it overall or were canceled for one reason or another. But we kind of live in a world now where battle royales and extraction shooters and things of that nature are kind of the popularity model. But what does a gaming landscape look like in 2027? What would you make an MMORPG look like? If it was Dungeons and Dragons based, I'd definitely check it out. Again, the trick to me though is Dungeons and Dragons is so popular because of its unlimited nature, and an MMO sort of finite hard, caps you because it has to. But then again, like I said, Baldur's Gate 3 was so popular, and with myself included in the mod scene there has absolutely exploded to allow creativity. So who's to say what an MMORPG based on D&D would look like? It also would be interesting to have a full-blown MMO, brand new, fully rolled out in 2027 based around a popular IP like Dungeons and Dragons. I think it has potential. I think definitely a lot of people would at least try it. I would definitely give it a shot, but I'm curious. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you feeling a little bit better about the big scary franchise model? And what do you think about a new D&D MMO? Is there room for that in the space? Could it do well? Would you play it? Anyway, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.